The most important skill you should cultivate when dealing with historical sources is analysis. Analysis. I messed up, sorry. One may think that approaching all documents is difficult or complicated, but actually, apart from the language and the handwriting and all these details, I would say it's pretty intuitive. And it's a skill we should all have, regardless of whether we work as historians or not. Knowledge, after all, is produced, kept, and distributed in writing. The thing is that in our education system, we don't really get to learn this kind of analysis, and it's definitely a tool that we lack, and that is actually, I would say, needed in the entire spectrum of jobs. So let's break it down, shall we? Part 1. What is a text and how can I approach it? From behind. We can roughly classify texts according to their nature into 3 different classes. Class 1, texts that follow a logical argument, that is, a set of premises and a conclusion that are structured in a logical order, that arguments, we could say. Most scientific, philosophical or theological books or writings structure this way. Second category is those texts that are plot-driven. That is, instead of a logical argument, they follow a plot. Think, for example, of almost every piece of literature there is. Usually it's plot-driven. And theatre, poetry, novels, and epic poems should belong to this category, but also religious texts, such as, for example, the Gospels. Group 3 is comprised of the boring documents, let's say, and I mean here, for example, documents such as legal documents or tax records, personal stuff, like, for example, letters and diaries. These texts are meant to contain information, usually maybe addressed to someone, in the case of letters and diaries. And many of them were not even meant to be read at all, and most notably, for example, diaries. But you have no idea of how much insight can a diary provide about the time period and life in general in a certain epoch or place. One of the best examples of this is Samuel Pepys' diary, which he wrote over 10 years, a whole decade. And is one of the most important records we have for 17th century England. And it's not plot driven, but oh boy, did he enjoy cheating on his wife. There's a 4th type of text, but it is comprised solely of Hegel and Heidegger, because they are neither plot driven, they contain basically no information whatsoever, and definitely they are too dumb to be considered philosophy. So not really anything, but I digress. During this series of videos, we are going to focus exclusively on type 1 and 2 of documents, although we may occasionally go to type 3 in order to get a particular insight on the time period. Our main focus along this series of videos is basically ideas and the history of ideas, which are usually better expressed in either type 1 or type 2 documents. These categories are fully horizontal. There is no category above the other. They are both equally important. Think that concepts can be presented both as philosophy, let's say, or through a good plot. And it's actually a mark of good penmanship to know when to use what. A movie about Saint Augustine's theological discourses would make you asleep, and a philosophical book about, the ideas within Mad Max Fury Road will very likely bore you to death. This distinction is pretty important, because if we attempt a logical approach to a text that doesn't have any trace of it whatsoever, we may misinterpret the text. Just as an exercise, you can go now to the link below in the description. It's a link to my blog, and you will see there a text, and you can ask yourself what kind of text that is. Is it a type 1, type 2, or type 3? Is it argument driven, or is it plot driven, or is it basically maybe a private piece of writing, or just random information? You tell me. Part 2. Now that I know what it is, how do I analyze it? Should I take it to dinner first? Let's say that we are on a date. What's the most important thing we should know? The first thing that we should know is what our date wants, and most importantly, what we want. If we ourselves don't know what we are looking for, then the date is basically over before it even starts. The same goes when we read an author. What are we there for? You see, you are either looking for what the author means objectively, let's say, and this would be the case especially if we are dealing with the first and second type of text, or maybe because you want to get information out of that text, information that the author may or may not have wanted to provide, because maybe it was just a detail or something. But why do we need to understand this? Well, basically, references to events we are trying to understand may be everywhere, and so can ideas. The 3 categories that we have previously defined are actually quite fluid. Books such as St. Augustine's Confessions defy all classification. It's a very literary autobiographical text that contains a lot of philosophical and theological discussions, and also has a lot of information about the daily life of a person in the Roman Empire during late antiquity. Although on average I would say that texts can be easily classified. Anyways, my point is that we should know what we want, and we should know what the task is. Are we trying to reconstruct an event, such as, for example, a battle, or a crisis, or the aftermath of a POKÉMON card battle? Or are we trying to understand how certain conceptions developed across the history of early Christianity? Again, all these categories are rather fluid. A event can change the history of science, philosophy, or theology, much like a set of Pokemon cards can change your life. I mean, forget about going to therapy or dealing with that hole in your life. Just go get some Pokemon trading cards. The smallest package costs only €5.95. So go now, get the first one and start collecting. You can use my promo code in order to get a sweet discount. Just go to Pokemon.com and upon buying, yes, use promo code I wish there was affordable housing and get a sweet minus 5% discount on every purchase. More on this with Dr. McAnal. That's right, I'm going to tell you right now how Pokemon cards can fill that hole in your life. Okay, so you see this bag here, this bag is empty. Now I put Pokemon cards in. Now this bag is not empty anymore. We are not legally allowed to tell you that these cards will grant you happiness, but we need to make you believe that, so we have made these cards like super shiny at all. You see, look, so bloody shiny. We are also required by our lawyers to tell you that change in anybody's life can only come through huge efforts sustained over time, and not by buying Pokemon cards. Oh, but hey, look, there's a tiny creature right there. It's super shiny, you say. The creature is right here. It's in the shiny piece of paper. And there's a fancy name. Look at the fancy name. This one is this fancy name. So go now to Pokemon.com and use promo code I wish there was affordable housing to get that sweet -5% discount on all purchases. Go collect them all. Part 3. Summing up the text. So let's say that we are dealing with a text of the first or second kind. Why is it so important to sum it up in the shortest amount of words possible? Well, summing up the text actually forces us to, summing up the text actually forces us to see the text as a whole and not just the conclusion. It forces us to see the whole thing from beginning to end as a single entity, because the conclusion and the lesson usually will be personal to you, and especially when talking about literature, and even sometimes in philosophy, and we may miss actually what is the point of the author. Only by trying to sum up the entire text do we have a chance to actually try to objectively understand what is meant by the text. In order to fully get this, one must go through each and every part of the text and ponder what's the function of that part within the text. This is perhaps best understood if we go to books and movies. There is a concept, particularly in movie making, there is a concept that it's called the logline. The logline is actually a short, very short text that actually sums up the entirety of a movie or a book or whatever, and usually is meant for producers so they can see whether it's worth going through the next step, which is the synopsis. A logline doesn't contain any detail, it's just the essence of what happens. So if you want any good examples of a logline, you can just check the loglines of your favorite movies. Try, for example, watch a movie and write a logline and then check with the actual logline of the movie how much did you get right. You can check also now in the link I mentioned previously, the text. You can try to sum up the text and see if you can get every single part of the text summed up in a single sentence. It's a rather good exercise for you to do. Just what's the logline of the text I posted on the blog. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and don't forget to comment in down below who our next sponsor should be.